Alrighty, I think we are ready to go. Short delay, as nearly always with these things, I guess. And yeah, first of all, before we start with the debate about the state of the chess world, 1 year after the beginning of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, I just want to welcome every one of you here. It's a pleasure to have you all here today for this debate. Several representatives of some German media houses, I'm especially delighted to have you here. The people in our stream right now that are also joining, and I think we will have a great debate. And the plans for today are that we start on the podium with the discussion, and as we move on later, I'm sure there will also be possibilities for you in the audience, maybe also for people in the chat to join in, ask a question. We will see. I think there will be the chance for that. And yeah, let me start with a small introduction. We have three wonderful guests here today, and I have an entry question for every one of them. And I would like to start with Malcolm Pein. You are actually a member of the FIDE Strategy Commission.
Yes.
As I see it right now, the only person on this panel with an official role inside the FIDE, I think.
Yeah.
The FIDE Strategy Commission is always told like an important board, an important commission, but what do you actually do?
Well, it has a very important sounding name, doesn't it?
Yes,
You know, if
indeed.
you want to make something sound important, add the word global. It transforms it, doesn't it? So I think it's almost meant to make the people inside it feel important in some way. My role in it, I came to it really by accident. I didn't try and join it during the Congress or anything like that. I didn't ask anyone to be put on it. But because I'm on the board of the European Chess Union, they're entitled to put one person on this commission. And they decided, for whatever reason, maybe because I'm the most commercial person there, I don't know, to put me on this commission. But my general view of it is, look, it's early days yet. There have been two meetings, both of which were notable for the fact that no agenda was circulated in advance, although they have minutes. I missed the first meeting. I attended the second one for most of it. I think genuinely it's a talking shop. I don't think it has any great value. Somebody might come up with a good idea while they're on it, I hope. I mean, I made one or two suggestions in the last meeting, but let's face it, you know, FIDE has become a very vertical organization, and I don't think that any of the commissions really have any great influence. You know, the body is now run by a very small number of people, so I'm sorry that I can't really answer your question very comprehensively.
Let me just interrupt you because
Yeah.
that's a great point. Let's keep that in mind.
Yeah.
And move on to Shoré Bayat. You are an arbiter in you have been an arbiter in multiple world championships. You have played for the English national team at the European Team Club Chess Championships, and you have been an arbiter in these special events. But what I always ask myself is, how do you actually become an arbiter in these events? How do you manage to get to these positions and move yourself up in these arbiter chains?
Well, it was a long journey for me because when I started playing chess, I was 9 years old. And it took a long time for me to be national arbiter in Iran because we have three different national grades. And then I tried to make myself up to date with new technologies as well. At the time, Swiss manager was kind of new in the country. And then after that, I started to learn digital live chess. So I became one of the famous arbiters in Iran. Then I managed to get invitation to Olympiad because each country could send one female arbiter and one male arbiter at least. When I went to Olympiad, then after that I met more people and I got more invitations. I think one thing that helped me in arbitering was that I was a player as well, which gave me so much confidence. I won't fear when I face the situation on the board, and I think it's because I was a player. I'm very familiar with chessboard, with positions. I think many arbiters have this difficulty when they reach to threefold repetitions and this sort of thing. But for chess players, it's not a problem. And I believe that it's something important for arbiters to have a background as a player. Yeah, for me, when I went to different tournaments, then I met more people and I saw people in FIDE, and then I got more invitations to tournaments. But it's not a clear route that everybody goes through the same way, because there was no regulations and to know that how you can follow the way to get to top level positions.
Which is quite interesting, actually, if I can chime in, that there seems no clear way to top level positions, but I think we will also come back to that later. Peter Heine Nielsen, the last one on our podium. I have also an introductory question for you. You are an active coach. You are the coach of the famous world champion Magnus Carlsen, current owner of the Triple Crown. And somehow you had the idea last year to become vice president of FIDE. And I wonder, like, how does an active coach come to the idea to become vice president of FIDE? And maybe additionally, is there something new about the chess world that you learned during your campaign?
Yeah, well, no, I think I mean, you sort of point out quite rightly that, well, from my perspective, I have a dream job in the chess world. I'm the coach of Magnus Carlsen, and while he's choosing not to be the world champion anymore, it doesn't mean he stops playing chess. And this is, well, it's incredibly interesting for me and really what I would like to do. So that I actually was running for the vice president of FIDE, well, I mean, it is somewhat extreme because it's not a job I would particularly like to have. I'd much rather do what I'm doing now. But I think it exemplifies how wrong I think the chess world is right now and how extreme I thought the situation was at that point. Still, having said that, it was not my decision that there should be a ticket. This Andrei Barishpolis decided that he will run for FIDE president, and he asked me several times to run with him, and apparently the last time I said yes. So, I mean, well, it was, you can argue it's a act of desperation, or rather that, well, I mean, as the situation is as it is, when a Ukrainian decides to run, when I think that, well, I mean, should the chess world elect him, a lot of the troubles we had would be over, or at least different problems, then I thought this was the reasonable thing to do. But I think also realistically speaking, everybody understood that the chances of winning was rather slim. So, I mean, this was more seen as some kind of resistance rather than a realistic project of winning.
Wasn't it important for you to just set up a sign, despite you knowing that it would probably be a failing project?
Well, I think I would much rather have had there was a serious challenge. Also, it's not something that we announced immediately, but no one sort of came along. I would rather say that probably we started running when some challenges came around that from our perspective did not look fully sincere. One thing that hasn't been talked about was that the only sort of perhaps serious challenge was a person, to my knowledge, no one has seen. He never showed up. No one has cared about this. Inan Shiripov, it's not my impression anybody knows who he is, more or less. This is, again, extremely puzzling. I mean, there was so many strange things, and I thought for us it was important that under these circumstances there should be someone who actually had a genuine opposition and give, well, countries who would like to oppose a chance to vote for it for us. So I think, yes, this was a huge part of it.
Okay. So I think when we talk about FIDE, there's a big elephant in the room, which we should address right in the beginning. Like we had it earlier today, 1 year this is the first anniversary of the Russian attack on Ukraine, of the aggression of war. And just a few days before this, the chess world has been the first sport internationally that allowed Russia to move to Asia to avoid European sanctions in sports in the chess world. How do you evaluate this move? What do you think of it? Is it a good thing to avoid this conflict in Europe, to give Russian players the chance to change freely or is this a typical FIDE thing? How do you see this?
Can I answer that one, since I'm obviously involved with the European Chess Union and been involved in crafting the press releases and the policy? Well, of course, it's scandalous that in an attempt to avoid the sanctions that have been rightfully placed upon the Russian Chess Federation by the European Chess Union, that they should try and run to Asia. And I like to write in my chess magazine quite often. In fact, my last editorial says, it's amazing, isn't it, how chess has always mirrored geopolitics. And you can see that Putin's looking east for support. And it's therefore quite logical, still scandalous, that the Federation wants to go to Asia, where they think their players will be able to avoid the sanctions that they're currently under at the moment. So I should point out, I suppose, that it hasn't actually happened yet. It has to be ratified by the Asian Chess Federation, who are meeting on Thursday. I strongly expect it to go through, even though I'm sure it's going to be quite detrimental. It's going to affect negatively the fortunes, particularly of Chinese and Indian players, who are suddenly going to find scores and scores of Russian grandmasters trying to compete for the same titles, for the same places in the World Cup, for all sorts of things, for resources. So it's scandalous, but I think it's going ahead. I think it's shameful that chess is the first sport to actually allow this. I think it's actually been tried in another sport. I may be wrong, but I think that it was mooted in football.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it was not allowed to happen. And I've got a feeling that something might happen in boxing as well, because the way that federation is run is not optimal either. And it is a matter of shame to the chess world that if indeed it happens on Thursday, that it's happening.
But why always the chess world? Why we?
Well, chess is heavily Russian dominated and has been since 1948. It just got it obviously got it got a lot worse when Curzon Ilimzhinov came to power, and now it's properly embedded. I mean, one of the things that Peter and I have in common is we've both stood to be deputy president of FIDE. And we've both seen on the inside how the Russian government mobilizes its resources to get its own way. I mean, when I stood, there was even a statement in a Russian news agency that said, well, okay, so Pein's standing, well, we better up our game then, we'll put in one of our big guns. And out came Dvorkovich, out came Arkady Dvorkovich. And he had incredible resources at his disposal. He had a private plane at his disposal. He had a huge staff. I mean, no one who went to the Olympiad at Batumi in 2018 will forget this famous party. Of course, I wasn't allowed in. But there were mermaids around the pool. Okay, there was a party for the delegates the night before the election at a nightclub opposite the Sheraton Hotel where most people were staying, or within walking distance where everyone was staying, where they put on this huge party with mermaids. I mean, the resources that you need to actually run something like that, to put something like that together, not to mention obviously traveling around the world, are absolutely huge. And, as Peter himself would readily admit, he had absolutely no chance. So I don't think that the Russian government needed to expend that many resources on supporting Arkady's campaign, although it was still very smoothly done and very well run. My ticket actually had a real chance, and at one point, in fact, I'm pretty sure that we were winning. So, at which point there was a geopolitical event in the Middle East, as far as I can tell. I'll never know what actually happened, but I know that Arkady flew off and then came back and was looking an awful lot happier.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because it's a good opportunity to open a point that is heavily debated in the chess world right now and in general, because the people in charge that use these resources right now, they always claim you have to divide chess and politics. Chess and politics doesn't fit together. We can't mix that up. We had that with you, Shore. You were actually wearing at the last Fischer Random World Championship a T-shirt with the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom" from the Iranian freedom movement, which is, as I would say, like a human rights claim, right?
Yes.
And they said it's an illegitimate mixing of chess and politics. So How do you feel when you hear stories like Malcolm just told them, with government resources being spent, and then you having such a simple claim in support of human rights, getting actually reprimanded for that?
Yes, that's a very good question. I'm an Iranian, and we Iranian never choose to be political. We will be labeled to recognize as a political. In Iran, that's the case. And my question is that should it be the case for the rest of the world? My T-shirt was three words: woman, life, and freedom. And these are three recognized, internationally recognized human rights words. Women is about gender equality that we are fighting for. Life is about the right of living in a safe environment. And freedom is something that is, again, internationally recognized as the human right thing. And these are the things that we Iranians are fighting for. It is human right, it's not politics. But we are living under a dictatorship. So whatever we do, the dictatorship regime in Iran labels us as the political and say that we must not talk about it, otherwise we face prison. I lost my right of living safely in Iran inside of a playing hall of a chess tournament, the Women's World Chess Championship match. So, how, for example, Arkady Dvorkovich says that I'm not allowed to speak about human rights in a playing hall. In a playing hall, that inside of it, I lost my right of living inside of my country. I think that makes me qualified to speak about it. And actually, I have some photos to show you. When I decided to wear this t-shirt, it was the time that this woman, Mahsa Amini, were murdered in Iran by morality police. She is wearing a loose hijab, exactly like I was wearing. So if I would come back to Iran, that could happen to me and can happen to millions of Iranian women who are living in the country. Is it politic to speak about about the life of a woman in Iran, or this is human rights? And here, you see these women, they lost their eyes because the Iranian regime shot to the eyes of these women. And these are just few examples of many. Many people are blind now because they started to say that woman life freedom, which is a human right motto, and the government, the regime, shot inside of their eyes. And they have to live the rest of their lives like this. If I don't speak about that, how can we save lives? How can we save the lives of people? And if sport is not about peace, then what it is about? We are fighting for peace. We are fighting for the same values that you have inside of your countries, and we want peace and freedom. You see that what is happening in Ukraine, which is against peace, and Iran is helping to Russia, sending them drones to kill Ukrainians. Can sport be silent about this? I don't think so. I think this is human right and not politics. And if we still silent about it, it happens and it gets bigger and bigger. For example, 2 days ago, this person, Jamshid Shahman, was sentenced to execution in Iran. He is a German citizen. So it's happening everywhere. And we have to speak about it because it gets bigger. Iranian regime kidnapped him from outside of Iran. Is it politics or human rights? Is this regime allowed to kidnap people? Is it allowed to kidnap German citizens and sentence them to execution inside of Iran? Somebody has to speak about this, I think.
So this brings up the question, why does FIDE have such a problem with this? Like, why don't they just let you do it, right? What is the problem?
Well, I would say that, first of all, Shori was in her rights to wear whatever she wanted, because there is actually no dress code for arbiters within FIDE. There is a dress code for players, And I think that it was difficult for the FIDE president as a Russian to have an anti-Iranian statement at a FIDE event. I'm sure that caused him some difficulty because he has to live a double life at the moment. On the one hand, he's in charge of an international sports federation, and on the other hand, he's a former member of the Russian government with all those connections. And he's in an exceptionally difficult position. But it was really it was outrageous that Shuri was told to change her clothing. It's notable that the organisers of the tournament had absolutely no problem with it at all. I believe that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that Shuri wasn't even breaking any regulation, and it just makes you can't make any other connection other than the geopolitical one. There's no there's no other reason. I'm sure if you'd worn a T-shirt of Che Guevara or something, there wouldn't have been a problem where you might have worn something about Myanmar, for example. Okay, and the terrible thing that goes on there. That I suspect that the FIDE president wouldn't have cared about that.
So, but if we on this podium have such a unanimous opinion, I kind of feel this. Why is there nobody speaking up? Like, I think I haven't heard any voice of any national federation. I think English Chess Federation had a resolution.
We did
some weeks ago.
We did.
Although I haven't read too much publicly about it, but maybe that was just my fault. But maybe that's the only thing. I think I haven't seen one statement by any federation. Like, why is no one speaking up?
I think that one should look at the power balance in the chess world. I mean, well, here, okay, we have the English Chess Federation and we have the German Chess Federation. You are both rather big. And
I'm the Berlin Chess Federation.
Sorry.
So.
Yeah, okay.
It
was tremendous praise, at least I can say as much.
Thank you.
But, well, it's two big federations who can sort of survive on its own. But, I mean, you cannot compare, let's say, Western alliances in geopolitics within the chess world. For instance, well, right now you see there is an alliance in the neighborhood of 35 countries their governments are signing that, Russia and Belarus should not participate in the IOC. And, well, they might not win this struggle, but they are very powerful and strong, and they have a real voice. This is not the realities in the chess world. This same bloc, well, you can see by logic, there is 35 countries there, we got 16 votes. So at least half of them was not voting for us. But also, I mean, if you look at, for example, the Danish Chess Federation, it's a small federation, it's run on a voluntary basis. This is the general sort of situation in the West, maybe not in Germany because you are a very big country, but there is no coordinated effort. And I think everybody understands that it is impossible to compete with the current realities. I mean, well, take the Russian Chess Federation. Their president is actually a billionaire, as far as I understand, Filatov. And he's by no means the richest person in their board. I mean, it's a completely different level of political connections and connections to money. It's an unfair struggle in that sense. And while in the world, for instance, you can see a UN vote goes heavily against Russia on this one-year jubilee. In the chess world, it's very different. So I think the geopolitical situation is just extremely different in that sense.
Yeah, you shouldn't forget that that Arkady was voted in a democratically fairly run election. No one's got any complaints about it. He was voted in overwhelmingly. Okay, overwhelmingly.
He's extremely popular.
And he's extremely popular, and actually he's a highly competent individual, and very personable. The only difficulty I have with him, frankly, is just the fact that he's Russian and his connection to the Russian government. The way that he conducts himself as president of the organization is extremely professional. Okay, but the issue is, as Pete said, you look at the overlap. I think we should actually clarify this point, that recently there was a meeting of 36 sports ministers, which was chaired by the UK sports minister Lucy Fraser, and a significant number of them, I think it was 30, wasn't it, out of 36, voted to ban Russian athletes and Belarusian athletes from the Olympic Games. That was the proposal. And yet, you've got 30 governments voting that way, and yet, Peter, you got how many? 15?
16.
16 votes. And probably some of those votes aren't even within those 30, in fact, because I think almost certainly you had some votes in Oceania. And so what you have here is examples of chess officials, and I've seen it in the European Chess Union as well, elected chess officials acting against the interests of their own governments within FIDE. And so when you've got a situation like that, frankly, there's very little that you can do. I mean, I don't come to this meeting with a hopeful message. I don't see any prospect of any change at all. I should make that absolutely clear. I mean, I personally have just decided just to get on with it.
Why did I invite you?
Yeah, well, if you want, there was, I remember, I think it was in the 1960s or 70s, there was some UK journalist for a newspaper, and they used to say, I can't remember what his name was, but let's just call him Jack Hargreaves. But the banner was, Jack Hargreaves tells you how it is. Well, I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell you how it is. I don't foresee any real change in the organisation. We can continue to lobby, but the only possibility that I could see that would actually engender any serious change in FIDE would be if a few people started getting sanctioned by the US. That would change things, I think.
Well, also we spoke about we both ran and failed. He was much closer than me. It was completely different.
Different dynamic.
Yeah. But if we go back one further step, it was Garry Kasparov running with a very strong US sponsor
and money.
Money against Kirsan Ilyumshinov, who is a much weaker candidate than Dvorkovich, and Kasparov lost heavily. Well, it gives the idea how geopolitics is within FIDE. And also, well, you mentioned it, but I see exactly the same, that, I mean, there is this geopolitical trail you can always follow, that FIDE, under the current leaderships, it's not like one-to-one Russian interests, but close. I mean, next World Championship match, it's going to be in Kazakhstan. And, well, you see, it's a very important country for Russia at the moment due to sanctions, border, etc. And, well, you can always see the motives there. Also, I've been to a lot of World Championship matches with my job. And there is like a parallel world where also you can see that a lot of VIPs will come and visit. It will be used for propaganda. I think the last World Championship, the Moscow mayor was there. There was the I think she's from Hanti-Manstins, I forgot what her exact title is, Komarova. Then there was a lot of oligarchs, for instance. I think there was Gureyev, who was one of the sponsors. Then there was Simanovsky, who was also sponsor of the trophy. And, well, it's a lot of people coming in for moderate sports washing to some extent. And it's not like that they will be pushed upon the chess world, but it's a parallel track there is, and the money is coming from there. And this has basically been something that the chess world has been living with. And well, we have done it actively or passively. We can disagree, or we can also say that it was wrong before. But then, I mean, February 24th happens, and not much changes. Well, now things cannot be done due to sanctions, and then it moves a little bit to the side. I mean, well, now it's a sponsor for the next World Championship match is, well, he was on the 2022 Russian oligarch list, but now he's changed his citizenship to Kazakhstan. And, well, then it's juridically okay, and it's extremely difficult for us to prove if it's genuine or not, and things like this, but it's always like just borderline on the right side of the border, but you can always follow this geopolitics as part of it.
So I understand, I mean, you explained that really well, how power dynamics in the international chess world are working, but that still doesn't explain for me the question that I put up. And like after the emotional speech that Choré gave, it's hard for me to understand why there are still no federations publicly speaking up, because I don't need to win a majority to criticize someone, right? And I don't need to win a majority to make my point visible and, for example, put myself and my federation forward to say, hey, we have these values, we defend them, we want to stand up, we want to be more forward. I mean, it's also nice, I mean, look at sports federations in general. I think that would be pretty easy for a national federation to stand out of all these sports federations which don't have these great public images, right? So I don't know, that explains majorities, but not where no one's speaking up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it comes down to the quality of the officials in charge of chess in each individual country and what their priorities are. I mean, there's one European country I could name. I'm not going to name them because I don't want to embarrass them, frankly. But, you know, they voted against my ticket. And by the way, I'd like to put on the record, I know my ticket wasn't ideal. I just think it was better than the alternative. they voted against my ticket because they said, well, look, Malcolm, ultimately, we've been promised a certain number of DGT sensory boards and a whole load of support, and we quite like to bank that. We don't want to lose that, and that's it. For us, that's going to be transformational. Wasn't an official message. It was given to me through an intermediary, but it was undoubtedly right. And okay, fine. You're not going to get past that. You don't have. Remember that chess officials in most European countries or in most countries around the world, as Peter said, and I think it's a key point, it's a voluntary post most of the time. I mean, even in the English Chess Federation, you'd have thought, a country in the G7, it's all voluntary. And so that means that when someone's a volunteer, it's far harder to criticize them. I'm sure you've had this problem in Germany. You have it in a lot of federations. If someone's doing a job and he's not being paid, it's quite frankly a lot harder to exercise any kind of control or criticism. Yeah. And I think that that's fundamentally the difficulty that we have. It's just not a priority for the people who... You have to ask yourself, what is the motivation of the person who comes to be in charge of the Chess Federation? In my case, it's because I genuinely want to make things better. That's why Peter stood. I mean, Peter is he has a far more illustrious career in chess than I have. But I didn't want to stand to be chief executive of the English Chess Federation. I did. But I felt things were so bad, I wanted to change it. And I was prepared to actually stand for that job that, like Peter, I didn't want. And so it's just occasionally there are some people who actually want to change things. But the vast majority of people who I've come across in sports politics and in chess politics, frankly, just quite like doing it, quite like the prestige of it, but they're not really there to drive change or to make a difference. I mean, there are some real exceptions. I've come across some federations that are brilliantly run. The French Federation now is brilliantly run. The Polish Chess Federation now is brilliantly run. There are some exceptions, but you're talking about nearly 200 federations. If you were going to effect a change, you'd need over 100 of those to change.
Also, a big structural thing is that there is a massive advantage of the current administration. I mean, if you are the current administration, you have contacts all over the world. You get to travel for 4 years. You get to, start projects, give out posts, a lot of things like this. It's a huge advantage. The only time we have seen the current administration not winning was when your ticket was losing, but at that point there was actually a split within the organization, so there was a bit on both sides. And as you pointed out specifically, it was a closely contested election, and your opponent had the resources of the Russian state. My main point is saying is that for someone to come from the outside and beat the current system, it needs an incredible amount of resources. I actually think that it cannot be ruled out that Russian influence of FIDE will be considerably smaller if, let's say, Dvorkovich cannot run the next time unless they interpret the rules differently, and if Russia might be busy, losing a war and things like this, they might not care, and then FIDE might change. But I will still say that, well, the current government will keep its post and it will need to find its money elsewhere from. But there is, well, you see it in FIFA, for instance, and many other things that, I mean, the sitting government has a massive strategical advantage. It's not like, let's say, in a parliamentary setting where there is a fixed opposition who also has resources. Here it's basically all versus nothing. That goes the same for, well, let's say, why should countries support us? Well, if they know we're going to lose anyway, why would they not support them and get some small benefits? Actually, one way for us was getting votes was more or less to scare them. It was sort of, well, we figured out that we should ask them in public, because then they will have almost problems with their government at home. There was one guy I called, I will not mention which country, but he said, you don't have to talk to me. If I don't publicly say we support you, I'm going to lose all our state support. I mean, it's just a waste of time. We're voting for you, move on. And this was actually, well, there is...
I wonder which federation you're talking about.
I'm not talking about yours, actually. So. But, I mean, well, but within the chess world, it's basically like, well, the current regime is good, they will do you good. If you are on good terms with them, well, you will get small favors or no disfavors. And as we said, well, Dvorkovich is liked, he's seen as competent. And, well, I think Malcolm describes it well. How is a person who is doing voluntary work gonna compete against a former high-ranked official with access to private planes and state money. Well, of course, it's an unfair fight, and it's not gonna work.
Yeah, I mean, this point about patronage is really important, and you know, Shorey is a good illustration of this. She's got on the wrong side of the FIDE officials, if you like, and now all of a sudden she's not on the Arbiters Commission. And by the way, I'd like to answer the question you asked to Shorey for her very simply. The reason that she got where she is because she's very, very good, actually. You know, that's the main reason she got to the top. It's because she's one of the best arbiters in the world at all levels, both in relationship with the players, her technical knowledge, everything. But she's now out of the Arbiters Commission because, you know, FIDE have decided that they don't want her in that. And after the election, every 4 years, the winner literally hands out all the jobs. Literally hands out all the jobs. All the commissions, all the chairmanships, all the memberships of this commission or that commission. And all of these can be used as not exactly bright, but let's call them incentives to vote for a particular person. And look, that's politics, that's how it is. You know, it's not totally different in the real world of politics. But it just makes, as they say in business, a massive barrier to entry for anyone. And I mean, I think I said this to you, Peter, during the campaign. You know, there are a few people came to me 3 years ago and said, will you stand for the FIDE elections? And I said, well, absolutely not, unless you have a massive sum of money, because it needs a massive sum of money to run a campaign. And so the barriers to entry and the barrier to effect a serious change are enormous. Sorry, telling you how it is again.
It's great because I want to get to that point. I was for 2 weeks in Munich for the FIDE Women's Grand Prix. Was an interesting experience. I think that was the first time in my life that I had the privilege to work so closely around and with the FIDE machinery, or a very small part of it. And the impression that I got, despite most people being really nice people when you meet them in person and everything, but it's quite personal, right? Like when you see people, when you know people, when you're inside of it, then you actually see opportunities, get jobs, have access to stuff. And if not, it's hard to get in. And it's hard to, like, you can do what you want, but when you're not inside of it and not part of it, you will not get any job, any invitation, anything. And so maybe to get back to you, Shorey, now that you're not a part of the FIDE machinery anymore, as I want to say it like this maybe, how is it for you and your arbitering jobs? What are your opportunities? How does this feel for you? And what looks your arbiter future now?
Well, okay, I would like to mention that in 2022, FIDE gave me the prize of the award of Best Female European Arbiter. So that's quite ironic that they removed me in the same year as a member of FIDE Arbiters Commission, and then they offered me to work in Women's Commission under officials of Iran Chess Federation, the people who harassed me and the people who were involved when I lost my right of living in Iran. So that's how FIDE works, and I knew that when I'm wearing my t-shirt, it has some consequences. The reason that federations don't speak up, because they know that if they speak, they need to face some consequences. So you have to be ready to face that, and I was ready for that. I knew that when I wear my t-shirt, it will make Russians unhappy because Russia and Iran are close friends, and I could predict that. But hopefully, I'm living in England, in United Kingdom, a free country, a country that I don't need to be worried when I express my opinions, and we have a brilliant federation and brilliant people there. So this is something that I learned there, to stand up and to speak up for the right things. And I knew that I'm not losing my positions in English Chess Federation inside that community. And when you lose something, you can create your own way. Yeah, I cannot work for FIDE, or I'm not sure if I have interest to work them at all as well, because they destroyed my motivations to work with them. You want to work for an organization that you trust them and it gives good feeling to you. And I was working for them for 4 years for free in Arbiters Commission, and it was every big job. And I created loads of things, lots of documents. I was working in the Arbiters Manual and many contributions. And it was all for free, because I love to help FIDE to improve and help other arbiters around the world. But now I can dedicate those times still in chess, but inside of England, inside of private tournaments like Norway Chess. I was in the US doing some private tournaments there. And I had my own project, Chess for Ukrainian Refugees, also with the help of Malcolm in CSC. So we teach in primary schools to children, and also we had chess for Afghan refugees, which was another project. So chess in schools community. So I'm not out of things to do, still have lots of things to do, but I think I had to speak up. I had to say that what happened, to stop that for others to happening, because it is the right of people to stand up for right things, to stand up for human rights, and maybe I'm facing this time these consequences, but next time that somebody else wearing this t-shirt, FIDE would be careful to uh, sanction them or to remove them from the commission.
Maybe if I can chime in there. Djokovic actually gave an interview to the Süddeutsche Zeitung, to the German newspaper, where he said two things, which I thought are quite remarkable. The first thing is that he admitted it is not a political statement, but a human rights statement, but it would have been only in the wrong place, as he said it, and that there will be opportunities that FIDE will bring you back to tournaments. So I don't know if FIDE has called you yet, but
Yes,
it looks like they changed their mind in some way.
Yes, Arkady contacted me, and we didn't reach to any agreements because we have different mindsets and different thoughts. So it was very difficult to reach to common grounds. Maybe in future we reach to a common ground, but what Arkady says is different from what he acts. This is very important. You cannot say that. I read that interview. He says that I'm one of the best arbiters in the world, and FIDE wants me to have these tournaments. But at the same time, he doesn't address that he removed me from the commission because I wear the human rights T-shirt, and this is in FIDE charter. It is FIDE's responsibility to promote human rights. So I'm not sure if I think at all to work for FIDE again, because first I need to make sure that this is a proper organization.
Okay. Well, I don't want to make a too hard cut, but I've seen a question in the chat which I have to address because it's so wonderfully pointed, and it's for you, Malcolm.
Oh, happy days.
Someone asks you correctly, I just quote, you correctly described FIDE as a corrupt and Kremlin-controlled organization. So what is your incentive to be part of such an organization?
So when that quote is from when Ilumzhinov was in charge. And the motivation was obviously very easy, to get in there and change it. And to change it completely. Take control of it and point it in a different direction.
That's a pretty solid answer.
Yeah, I mean, and not a very difficult one to understand, I hope, for the questioner, if he's still there.
Yeah, very nice. But I thought I had to bring that up when I saw this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, the idea was to go in there and transform it. Transform it or leave, of course. Yeah.
So I want to bring up two last angles before I will give up my okay. How can we do FIDE better, change whatever? Like because that's why I brought up the interview also. I felt like public pressure and actually a media, a public that actually looks into FIDE, into the chess world. I also seen that at the German Chess Federation one or two times, when people actually report stuff and care for what is happening and bring to the light all the stuff that happens in the background, like simply the stories that you were telling about a delegate party. I mean, you could write so awesome stories about this, and with awesome I mean, yeah, not awesome, but you know what I mean. So is maybe more interest in chess in the public, in the media, into chess politics and everything, an angle where we could maybe hold people more responsible and change something. And yeah, that's actually the thing that I wanted to bring up.
Well, I mean, Peter and I have tried very hard. I think it's extremely extremely difficult. But all I would say is that people in their countries need to encourage their federations to take the kind of stand that the English Chess Federation and people like Peter have done. And we literally have to pump up the volume. I think that one thing that encourages me is the meeting that Peter referred to of the 36 sports ministers. I'd like to address this point, and also actually to answer your question that you asked Ashori about. People say sport and politics shouldn't mix. I mean, I think we can all agree on that in general. There just has to be a limit, and what we have to debate is where that limit is. And my sense of it, and this might lead to some kind of change within FIDE, possibly if it was to happen on a much higher geopolitical level, is that right now we have some sanctions on the Russian Chess Federation. They're fairly limited in nature, and they're in accordance pretty much with the IOC. They're not identical, but they're, in general, teams are not allowed, flags are not allowed, officials are not allowed, even though we have a Russian in charge. Right? But my sense of this, particularly after the statement of the 30 nations out of the 36 at this recent meeting of sports ministers, is, and the mayor of Paris has said this, Anne Hidalgo, she said that she'd be uncomfortable with the idea of Russian and Belarusian athletes coming to Paris for the 2024 Olympics. And I think that I'm in agreement with that. I'm in agreement with, if this war is still going on, if there's no change in the stance of the Russian government by the time of the Olympics in 2024, I personally would support kicking out all Russians and Belarusians from sport completely. Now, there is only one precedent for this, and that is apartheid. And apartheid in South Africa, when black people were systematically discriminated against in a racist state. And I see some parallels between the way Russia is behaving now and apartheid in South Africa. And these parallels are the following. The war against Ukraine is based on racism. It's based on the idea that Ukraine should be a subject state of the Russian Empire, that Ukrainians are somehow inferior culturally to Russians. And you can see this when Russia takes over Ukrainian towns and cities, how they will destroy Ukrainian books, how they destroy the museums, how they replace the teachers in the classrooms. Okay, we're talking about a cultural as well as a human. I hesitate to use the word genocide, but why not? As well as genocide of people, it's like a cultural genocide going on here. Of course, there are different levels of genocide, and I see this as racism, as colonialism, and therefore I think you can make a parallel with apartheid South Africa in that sense. And some people actually struggle to see that there is racism when there isn't a different color, when different people of different colored skins are not involved. It's very easy, isn't it, in America to say, well, George Floyd was black and he was killed because he was black and this is racism. It's harder to think about racism between Russians against Ukrainians, which is it's the same thing, by the way, that makes people struggle with the idea that anti-Semitism is racism, because most Jews, but not all Jews by any means, are white. But anti-Semitism is anti-Jewish racism. And I see these parallels now, and that's why my position has shifted generally. I would be comfortable if by July, August 24, we still have the same situation. to actually push for all Russian athletes to be banned from every sport. And I can see a political movement, not within chess, but within governments towards that. And that will force a real change, in my opinion. I think that would have some effect. It would have some effect in FIDE.
Let me just disagree a bit with Malcolm on the terms of the chess compared to IOC sanctions. IOC definitely recommends not allowing Russians and Belarusians to compete at all, and this is a huge difference. That I think it's a huge victory for Djokovic. That there's very few sports, maybe tennis, boxing as well, but we're thinking about rather limited there. And I think a reason is that, well, while IOC has basically full sanctions on Russia and we have less, we never had this discussion that I think is reasonable. I think, well, Magnus Carlsen brought it up, but let not bring in my boss in this conversation, that, well, we decide after maybe 4 or 6 days that, well, we sanction Russian money, we sanction their teams, but not the individuals. But, well, this is like a weekend. Now a year has passed. And while in other sports they're debating, should we maybe lessen the sanctions a bit, it's important to understand that our sanctions are much smaller. We should have the other conversation of, well, this is just going on forever. I mean, in a few months, we're going to have a World Championship match with a Russian participant. I don't think many other sports have it like this. And, well, we can have the situation that the war is going to escalate. You can see a lot of equipment is being brought in by both sides for when the weather gets warmer and they can move more freely. And we can have a World Championship match at exactly that point. And, well, I mean, that strikes me as deeply embarrassing. It shouldn't be like this. But, well, this is not even part of the conversation. While in other sports, well, they would be very different. So I think, I mean, this is a huge win that is somewhat underestimated.
Well, Peter, yeah. I mean, Russian athletes are competing in all kinds of sports, and the recent statements of Thomas Bach, the IOC president, were moving towards trying to find a way for Russians and Belarusians to compete in Paris.
Pathway, yes.
So, you know, I think that that the IOC's path is incorrect and out of kilter with how certainly Western governments are thinking. And it's interesting that the IOC, quite an interesting article in one of the sports business of sports papers recently, that the IOC was apparently sending out messages to its National Olympic Committee president saying, please lobby your sports ministry because we think they're going to be very negative about what we're trying to do to facilitate Russian and Belarusian participation. So they're clearly worried. I mean, the IOC at the moment is actually, in my opinion, being far too lenient on Russian and Belarusian things. I don't think we're that far away from them.
I think a general point is that in the sports world, there is much more, well, friendliness is the wrong term towards Russia, but, well, you can see they will get more votes, they will be milder in the international organizations, while, for instance, you see in the OSCE yesterday, people simply left. You saw the vote in the UN.
Yeah.
And I think, well, it's important to understand that in sports organizations, there's a huge personal network. I mean, for instance, well, speaking of the FIDE Congress, I barely knew anyone because I'm not in this world. It's a small world where, well, Gens Unasumus works there, so people know each other.
How is that actually possible that you as a coach of the world champion who actually travels to so many tournaments and is living his life in the chess world is not possible, is not able to know anyone who actually makes decisions about the chess world?
Paul,
isn't that crazy?
It's a parallel universe.
Yeah, but that sounds ridiculous.
It's a parallel universe. What I learned campaigning in 2018 was that to win the election, you didn't need great policies. You needed a heck of a lot of money, but what you needed was to make 192 personal relationships. Because like Peter, I've been involved in chess all my life. And I reckon out of those about 190 delegates, I reckon I knew at most 40.
I was
at most.
Not even close.
maybe, actually, no, to be fair, I probably knew maybe 50.
But that was the point I was also trying to make, that, well, people know each other in the chess world, and, well, somehow personal relations makes it less about countries, while a vote in the UN or in the OSCE it's based on governments, it's
Yeah.
based on parliaments.
Yeah.
This is things that are heavily exposed to local politics and decided in a setting, while delegates is one person. I mean, we all know each other. Can't we be friends? Can't we talk
More
about
like a club, isn't it? More like a club.
Very much so, and it's
Yeah.
extremely understandable. I mean, don't get me wrong. I feel extremely uncomfortable speaking for sanctions of Russian players because a lot of them are personal friends for a very long time. It's
Me too.
I mean, I speak very friendly with Nepomniachtchi. He's a great chess player. We are. I mean, we can discuss chess. Well, I'm not good enough, but I mean, I'm the coach of his opponent. We speak about chess. It's very. I mean, it feels wrong that it's me who should actually push for him being sanctioned. But well, we are a small family, and that makes it very difficult. And I think it's the same in the other sports. While if you go on a higher level in the UN, it's some ambassador who is rotated. They don't make the same personal connection. They are very responsible to their own country.
Yeah.
It's completely different in the sports world, and I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's a good moment to bring this to a point. We learned a lot about chess politics. Holy moly, I learned a lot. Not that I like everything, but it is how it is. Maybe for everyone who is watching and listening, we will soon have the opportunity, if you have any questions, to raise your hands and bring that up. But I just want to get a bit back from away from classic chess politics and just bring another thing up. Like we talked about a lot about FIDE, but somehow we have another big player now in the chess world. Chess.com, right, is like a whole organization of its own. Some people dream of Chess.com making FIDE irrelevant. Some people scare that Chess.com and the online world will bring down chess culture forever. But how do I sort this in all this chess world power struggle? The FIDE, Chess.com, are these competitors? Are they actually merging in some way, working together? I think Chess.com sponsors a lot of FIDE events actually and brings a lot of money to FIDE. Is this only a way that a thing that fuels more money into a broken system? Like, how do I have to imagine this? Or will Chess.com free us all from FIDE?
Who knows? But I think it's a very interesting point in general that the sums we talk about with FIDE are rather small compared to what you saw that Chess.com was capable of buying the Play Magnus group. I forgot the exact figure in the end.
Was it 83?
Maybe something like 83 million, while FIDE's budget is, well, perhaps barely 2 digits, depending on how you look at income and outcome. But Chess.com is mainly a commercial product that's very successful, while I think FIDE struggles to have a product. For instance, FIFA, they actually sell TV rights for World Championships for a huge amount of money. FIDE has more been, getting, well, in the previous, when they could, they would actually have what was called donation from Russian sponsors, which, I mean, the contracts basically says that they don't necessarily have to get something in return. But, I mean, it's not like chess events are massively sought after and are very expensive. It's more like, for instance, the Chess Olympiad doesn't work on a commercial basis. You basically need someone who's willing to pay 10 millions for it, and it's very difficult to get democratic countries to do that because the taxpayers will think, why are we doing this? And then we end up, in my opinion, in the wrong places, and we struggle with these kind of things. Of course, you also see with FIFA that, well, there was the recent World Championship with a huge debate, especially here in Germany, for instance, right? But, well, there is the kind of things. But FIDE struggles to have an extremely popular product, in my opinion, while Chess.com does. And that, of course, is an interesting struggle in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, Chess.com has been bought by a private equity company, so you can expect them to be commercial. Generally speaking, they've got a much bigger turnover than FIDE, of course. They've got vastly more employees. They've got a much better brand. What they don't have is, if you like, the legitimacy. And in fact, there was quite an amusing little argument when Chess.com made the mistake of using the word world in one of their competitions. And FIDE immediately, I think rightly so actually, I mean, I think all credit to Dvorkovich for this, attacked this and said, we are not calling it the world. Might have to come back to my favourite word, global, by the way, for that instead. But and so FIDE. So what FIDE does have is the legitimacy of being the game's governing body, but it is in danger of being completely overshadowed by something like chess.com because they're just that much more powerful. And so what FIDE needs to do is to become an awful lot more commercial fairly quickly. And I can't talk about it or I'll be sued. But I do give them credit. Actually, they are trying to do that at the moment, in fact. And I think that they actually have to. I think they realise that they'll just be overtaken by events because, you know, there's a massive new generation of players out there who have absolutely no idea who Capablanca was. Okay? And the only way they'd ever know that is if Gotham Chess decides to stream a Capablanca game, and then they'll all know. And but it really is remarkable. I mean, I'm sure it's the same here in Germany. I keep coming across hundreds and hundreds of new players. It used to be the case that you could go into a pub, and if anyone challenged you for a game, you just crush them. I went to my daughter's birthday party in a pub in London, and she said, "Oh, I've got a couple of friends. They've just got into chess and they'd like to play you." Now, I promise you, 25 years ago, I beat those people blindfolded. No problem. This time, I'm 15 moves into a Rai Lopez, thinking, "How the hell do these guys know this stuff?" and so, but the point I'm making that relevant to your question is, these are people from outside the chess world. There's a whole new world of chess out there that isn't involved in the old sort of FIDE kind of structures. So they don't care about it. They don't need it. They get their enjoyment from chess in a completely different way. And chess.com is in tune with that. Chessable is in tune with that. FIDE needs to get in tune with that, but they see it. They actually see it. So, I mean, no, Arkady certainly understands that absolutely, in my opinion. And so, but they need to be really quick.
Yeah, I mean, already a lot of money that the top players, for example, do is already from chess.com competitions. They kind of take over there. But on the other hand, it's a pretty unregulated place, right? I mean, maybe out of your perspective as an arbiter, like chess.com, just sometimes it feels like they just change their mind. This is bannable, this is not bannable. It's like there are no rules. Like on one hand, we don't do anything. Then Jabava gets banned for 1 year out of a sudden. Like obviously he fucked up, but that was pretty like they just decided it, right? No rules, nothing. I don't know. It feels like
I think, yeah, from one hand, it looks like that, but if you are an insider, probably you know that the platforms use many information, like they have their own fair play system, they use statistical analysis, they have a team of fair play, they work with grandmasters to see those games, and they do loads of researches. Sometimes there are some fishy players, there are suspicious players, but they cannot ban it because they need to think about what happens if the players sue them. So they need to have enough evidence to ban someone. And this is the red line for this platform. So sometimes there are people that they know kind of that these people are cheating, but the evidence is not enough to ban them. But when they normally ban someone, it means that they have lots of evidence and they are prepared to be sued and that they are prepared to answer in the court. So I think chess.com has a very sophisticated fair play system.
The real question, though, I think the sort of kind of moral political question in this is that when chess.com bans someone and it becomes a matter of public record, that seriously affects that player's ability to operate in the rest of chess.
I wonder what you're talking about.
Yeah, indeed. And therefore there is a question, isn't there, about who watches over chess.com.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that, at that point, I think, I mean, at that point, that's where the governing body has to kick in. So these are very, very difficult questions for chess in general. That you have this conflict, not only this commercial rivalry, but also, if you like, this administrative clash of who's actually going to decide who's a cheat and who's not.
That's maybe typical for some American sports that are actually commercially owned and run like this. But I think it exemplifies it well that, well, we all seem to believe that chess.com actually has the expertise in terms of anti-cheating. And it's quite reasonable to assume so. Well, they are a business who are heavily depending on selling an honest product. While in FIDE, well, I think you mentioned that commissions are partly political to a certain extent. They have less funds, and I mean, well, they might come behind. I think their expert is Kenneth Reagan, and he even said on his own stream that, well, it can't be that you know, they just send some professor who he's referring to himself, some professor who has to do a college lesson in half an hour and want to have some prints out. I mean, this is not serious, and that's the main expert. Chess.com is a different entity because they have much bigger funds and they depend heavily on this kind of cheating, while chess doesn't, FIDE doesn't. I think, well, I think we all agree that the political challenges within FIDE is extremely unlikely to succeed. Well, what could be a threat to FIDE is if they run out of money to a certain extent. That would be serious because then their system breaks down. And well, with the situation in Russia, hopefully it means that well, we will not keep getting money from there, and then, well, they will have to be found somewhere else, and you'll see they're capable of that. Most likely they are, but I think that's the kind of threat FIDE faces. And of course, I think you point out that, well, if chess.com start paying a lot of money, which they do, they become very attractive. I think one thing we haven't mentioned, but, well, both the World Championships for in open and for females, as well as the World Team Championships, the best players are not really playing at the moment, or well, only Magnus, but for instance, the World Teams, not really. I mean, can chess.com create events that are incredibly popular? They have the potential to overtake, of course. So there is some kind of struggle going on there.
Fair enough. So I want to give the people in the audience the opportunity, if there's a question, before I put my final question to you, although I have to change it a bit, but I come back to that later. Is there someone in the audience who wants to put out a question or bring up a topic, maybe? Then now there will be the opportunity. No hands. So we come back to
you
my...
got two hands, actually.
Oh. So maybe you start.
Okay. You were talking about the self-sustaining system of FIDE. So they have the power, but they stay in power because of their self-sustaining system. And my impression is, because I work in our local communities, people don't really care about this because they only care about their chess on Sunday and playing the pub. So the question now is, should we do something about it? Or, like you said, you don't see any kind of hope. What do you tell people who don't really care about FIDE, but care about chess.com? What do you tell them? Okay, don't care about FIDE, play your own stuff at home or in the chess club. But then you have the separation between our local amateur players and FIDE, who is up there and nobody really knows what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I just want people to play chess and enjoy it in the way that they want to. You know, you can make a comparison with the children who play in the park on a Sunday and FIFA. There's absolutely no reason why young Jürgen and Norbert playing, you know, in the under-8 championship of Kreuzberg for football need to care that much about FIFA at the end of the day. But of course, the point is that FIFA's a global brand and they'll see them every 4 years in the World Cup, right? So in that sense, they'll have that connection. But I don't see it as too much of a problem. I'm just delighted with how chess is going now. It's a shame that we don't have a much more Western-looking and commercial federation to run it. It's a shame that so many national federations are largely amateur and voluntary. And I think if they were more professional, we could make this chess explosion even bigger. But the idea that the average player or these new people don't have a connection with FIDE doesn't worry me that much. I mean, I think there are some things that you could do to improve that. I mean, one of the things, which is an absolutely great idea that came within FIDE, actually, that was developed by Victor Bologan, is the idea of a universal chess rating. that absolutely every player on any server or in any league or any environment can have a rating. Okay, it won't be your FIDE, your ELO rating, it'll be your universal rating. I think that's a fantastic idea that could be developed, which would enable you to bring everybody into one environment. I'd like to see that one develop further. Does that answer the question?
If I can also sort of, I mean, I think FIFA is the answer to your question, right? We just had it with the World Cup. I mean, I think you had a huge discussion in Germany, so did we in Denmark. Everybody seems to agree. Well, the situation is horrific, but there's absolutely no possibility to change it. I mean, you saw first there was Havelange. He was replaced by Sepp Blatter, who was a secretary, who then was replaced by Infantino. Well, it keeps being renewal of insiders in the system. I'm willing to take any bet people want that the next FIDE president will come from inside the current leadership, not from outside. This is how things work as it is, and it's incredibly difficult to break this system. But I think I agree with Malcolm. Chess is thriving extremely well, but the numbers you will see on Gotham Chess, or you will see it on chess.com users or lead chess users, you will not see it in FIDE because it's difficult. I mean, for them to grasp. And perhaps I would be less enthusiastic than Malcolm about having this unified rating, because I'm very happy that there is separation between these things, so that the FIDE doesn't get to control everything. So,
okay. So, Florian Pütz, you had
maybe a question to all of you. Can you imagine any person who could win the next election against Arkady Borkovich? Maybe someone from out of the chess world, or maybe a popular active player?
I'll answer this first because I see that Malcolm and Peter mentioned there's not much hope, but I personally believe that there are hopes. And I gave this idea from someone, an Iranian inspired me. He lost his family when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard shut down the Ukrainian flight in 2022, and many innocent passengers were killed. He was one person, and he stood up for his family, for his wife and his daughter. And he was alone. Iranian people call him one-person army. He insisted for what he believed, and now he is a leader. He is a big leader in Iran. And there are many followers and many people, millions of people who are following his voices. But for a long time, he was alone and he was one voice. So I think we can bring a big impact in our society by speaking about things. And I believe that the reason that you are all here is that you believe that there are some hopes. Otherwise, why we are here? But the hope is not a fast process. It's a gradual process. The change is a gradual process, but it eventually can happen. We just need to address what is happening in the chess world and to speak up about it and to create a good role model for other people to see that we are not alone, and when people speak about the right things, they will be supported for chess community.
I would just say that Arkady doesn't need to. He won't be standing for election next time, because one of the things that he instituted himself, which I greatly support, and I thought I was really impressed that he did it, was term limits. So you can only be FIDE president for 8 years. So at the next election, actually, he doesn't stand.
So maybe question in this direction. Can you imagine someone who can really have an impact on a change at FIDE?
It's difficult, because when you look at how in sort of general politics, people who tend to do really radical change is sometimes affected in a very surprising way, like a celebrity or something like that suddenly becomes president. That's happened in a few countries. But
former world champion.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if there was a former world champion to stand, possibly. But it's, maybe the current deputy president might be an idea.
Who is that? Because
Vishy Anand could be a possibility, and would lead the organisation in a different direction, perhaps.
Would he be the real guy for changes? He's a Borkovich right now.
Well, I mean, Vichy is a generally very incredibly impressive individual. Yeah, absolutely.
He could be seen as a compromise candidate. The problem perhaps is if they promote someone else, that will, if there's different fractions within FIDE, then one of them will have to win, while if it Vichy, it would be more smooth and divided in a way. Well, I think if you look at the candidates in the last elections, you get to understand how difficult it is to imagine what you're suggesting, because well, what the Western sort of the opposition comes up with is people like me or Andrei Barish, which people has barely heard about before. I mean, Kasparov tried, but it's very difficult to get a big brand name to run on something that's not really going to succeed. And perhaps being president of FIDE is not that attractive either. It's also, by the way, as far as I understand, a completely unpaid job. So, I mean, I think simply, well, the other side wants it much more, and that's why they are gonna win most likely until they run out of money or political. I mean, geopolitical things could change it, but it's very difficult to see changes from within. Also, you can see that well, we are sitting here, but there is no chess federation has shown up or anything like this. I think the interest is moderate. My general impression is that we three like to talk about this topic, but the chess world would rather have that we kept silent, to be honest.
Okay, so yeah.
When you say there's no hope at one side, but you want to pump up the volume, what pump up the volume then could be, or what does it mean special?
Well, meetings like this certainly, resolutions from the English Chess Federation. I think engaging with your governments is a really good way of pumping up the volume, and that's where I see the possible. The one hope for change is at a higher political level, whereby powerful governments will simply demand change in terms of sports policy towards Russia. I mean, I see a big battle coming between these 30 governments and the IOC, and that could make a difference. And I think that's what federations who are interested or individuals who are interested need to do, is to engage with their politicians in their own countries.
And as you said, it's not in short terms, but in long terms. So this volume won't be reached till the next election, maybe.
Next election is in 2026. I think the big battleground is the Olympiad in Paris at the moment, 2024. And I generally agree with Malcolm. While in the chess world, I mean, me, for instance, running as this vice did not bring much good. But for instance, in terms of, well, I have spoken with Danish ministers who praised it, while they are basically completely inaccessible for Danish chess players to get in touch with ministers. But this has been different here. In a week, I'm meeting with the head of the Danish Sports Confederation, which would be completely unthinkable for a chess player to do that. So this is something that actually unites us. So I would think that, well, for us who wants change, it might be enforced upon us from above. But I think, well, we are not gonna. I mean, well, you can see there's a big fight about should Russia be part of the Olympiad in 2024. But in chess, well, Russia will play the World Championship match in a couple of months. We are too small for them to care. But if they make rules for 2024, it might include us in the legal framework, and we might end up in that direction. I think that's what Malcolm is saying.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with
I mean, it's interesting that the Danish government are taking an interest, because the British government took an interest actually about, I think it's about a year ago. The UK Foreign Office suddenly held this meeting about reducing Russian influence in sport, and this was unheard of. I was completely shocked to be in, A, that it was happening, and B, to be invited. Yeah.
No, when we were campaigning, I was pointing to these 36 countries. Well, look here, your government has actually signed. It says directly you should not elect people who has, well, sort of ties to Kremlin. And I say, well, look at this. But I mean, well, sports officials are not forced to do that, at least not at the moment. But it's clear that the government was saying you should actually do this. And while with chess, who cares from governments on certain places? Now with the IOC, it's a huge battleground. You can also see that the Ukrainian government is extremely interested in this. Both the President Zelensky and such, they are posting out videos all the time. This is a huge propaganda battleground. And, well, of course, not like the real battleground, but they care about this. This is clear, and there is a political struggle at the moment.
Maybe if I can chime in also, like money from
Yeah,
governments,
this
right?
affects
I mean,
Germany.
look at the German Chess Federation. We get 220,000 euros a year right now, and we really had to fight for some of it because it was in danger due to participation together with neutral Russian athletes, right? And so simply that alone made clear how the German Chess Federation has to stand to not put this money into jeopardy, right? So that obviously is an angle too.
But that's, I mean, the big fight by the IOC is saying that we as a sport, we want to decide on ourselves. Government should not decide on this. And for governments, that's difficult, but then they might do as in Germany, says you decide on yourself. But if you compete with Russians, you don't get any money. So there is this kind of struggles going on. I think we see it in, well, the tennis tournament.
Sounds like a fair offer.
Well, just trying to describe what could happen generally.
I think there was another question.
Yeah, hi. You talked a lot about Djokovic and how important it would be to replace him. What I wonder is, what do you think, how deep goes or does Russian influence go in FIDE? Is it enough to just replace the president, or does Russian influence go deeper than that? And is it really enough to just replace Djokovic with someone with less ties to the Kremlin?
I genuinely think so, actually. I think if Djokovic disappears and they don't replace him, the ties will be much smaller if they can find money elsewhere. I would also assume that at the current situation, it becomes less of a priority. But I think also, I don't know how it was when you were running for election, but my feeling was that, I don't know if it was a bit random. I mean, Djokovic lost his job in the government and then he was pushed in that direction. I mean, this is not the most important thing for the Kremlin, obvious, but it still matters to
But
quite
it
some
still
extent.
matters to
Yeah,
them.
of course.
Yeah. No, I mean,
There's no obvious candidate either, I guess. Who knows?
you know, if the situation was different and if there was no war and Russia was a different country, I'd have no problem with Russian influence in FIDE. You know, Russia's got fantastic players, fantastic tradition. It's really important. It should be at the center of chess. It really should be in an ideal world. And I think that Arkady Dvorkovich is a highly competent president, actually, and he's done quite a good job in many respects. It's just in the current situation is absolutely untenable. It just is and unacceptable. And I think that that FIDE, though, structurally, I think there are a lot of issues. It's not just Russian influence. It's almost like it's the same thing that I said about the English Chess Federation, but I won't waste everybody's time with that. But it is there was a phrase. I'm borrowing a phrase from a former Labour minister when he took over the Home Affairs Ministry of in the UK. He just said this thing is institutionally unfit for purpose, and I think that in some senses, you know, the structure of FIDE isn't something that really works for a forward-looking sports federation. There are so many parts of it which, frankly, are just irrelevant, just don't really do anything. Certainly, most of the commissions. I mean, I'm sitting on one.
Global Strategy Commission.
Yeah, I genuinely don't.
man.
I genuinely don't know what we're meant to do.
Yours is by far the most powerful, is my impression. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, we sometimes I think we can affect the rules of the World
Yeah,
Championship.
exactly.
We can actually make.
I
Some
was
influence
always
on that.
told that it's actually the most important commission, so that
Yeah.
looks pretty grim, to be honest.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think at the moment it's just more a matter of principle rather than the direction and the functioning and the good functioning of the organisation. It's just that we are at the moment, the organisation just seems to be very biased towards Russia, and that has to change. But that's different from how it goes on in the future, if you like.
I would
I'm sorry, Peter, but I have to stop this there because we are running out of time, sadly, although I love to talk with all of you. And I just want to come to the final part. I was about to ask you in the end, so how looks a better FIDE? But I think I will scratch that question and just ask, like, what do you think, what can we do, and how would it look a better international chess world? What can we do to make this a better community, a better place, to bring some positive change? What do we have to do?
I think FIDE should allow other organizations to work. Don't try to influence them, let them to have their freedom. If they speak up for the good things, it should have consequences for them. Right now, many delegates fear to speak for their beliefs. They can express what is their opinion in private, but they cannot express it in public because they may be in danger of losing their position inside of the FIDE, because they are also in FIDE commissions or some other part of the FIDE body. So I think we need to have freedom of speech. That's one thing, and we have some good rules. We need to follow that. Like we have a FIDE charter, so I don't know why I have to face consequences when I am exactly in the line of FIDE charter. So this is just one example that I could give about myself. And I think we need more transparency, especially in financial matters. We don't need Russian sponsors, and we see a lot of them in FIDE. We don't need Russian influence. And I can give you one example. In 2018, when I was General Secretary of the World Chess Federation, I received a letter from Ministry of Sport in Iran. It was saying that Russian embassy in Iran asked them to support, ask us to support the Russian candidate for the election in the FIDE election. So you see that these things, and this is not right. We need to be away from politics, and that's exactly you asked me when is the politic and when is the human life. This is influence of politics inside of our sport. We don't need Russian embassies to write to our federation and to sport ministry to say that for which candidate in chess we should vote for. Yeah.
Thank you, Shabin.
Thank you.
And Malcolm.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just repeat and try and amplify what I said, that if you want to effect change at the moment, I don't see the change coming from inside the chess world, because I don't see the motivation among sports chess officials and chess federations particularly. I think it's extremely hard. But if you want to make a difference, then I think it would be more engaging with the sports ministries of your individual countries, trying to convince them that chess matters. It matters in Russia, and therefore there is some, if you like, there is a decent cost-benefit ratio to investing time in putting pressure on the IOC and trying to effect some much bigger change in the attitude towards Russian participation in sport. Because I think that more general attack, that more general increasing of the sanctions, and I think that sanctions should slowly be ramped up against Russia until we reach this point in 2024 at the Olympics when there should be zero participation. I think that what you can do on an individual level, everyone in every country, should be to try and lobby their sports ministry to support the attitude of the 30 ministers at the recent meeting. And I think that is a very easy thing to focus on. It's very simple. It's difficult to get diverted from it. And that's what I would propose that people on an individual level do.
Okay, thank you, Malcolm. And Peter.
Well, I generally agree with what's said. Also, that long term, I think there's a lot of things we can improve in terms of governance, etc. At FIDE. I have spoken about that other places. But well, I ran for this thing for basically short-term changes, extremely motivated by the full-scale invasion. And well, I think today chess.com has an article about Ukrainians in chess players, how they have survived and things like this, and they talk about this. But well, their general conclusion is asked about FIDE is that they are disappointed with them, and that I think Pavel Elyanov, their strongest player, even says that well, they were even more pro-Russian than I thought, and well, that has failed on a short term, and I'm embarrassed by that. And that has been my motivation. As I said, I shouldn't be FIDE vice president, but I think that, well, we should improve things in governance. But to end it on a positive note, I would say that, well, what we can do is that we generally grow the game, because, as we said, at the moment, chess is growing, chess is doing well, not only in Russia, but in a lot of other places. Chess.com is becoming a factor, chess in schools, etc. If chess becomes more popular, politicians will care more, balance will shift. I mean, that is a positive long-term goal, not to fight politically, but actually to shift the balance. I think short-term, unfortunately, it's very difficult. And should something happen short term, it's going to come from above. Yeah.
So there is hope, as I can hear it. Thank you. Thank you for coming, for taking the long way to Berlin to come here. That's really great that you did that. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the many people in the chat and in the stream for joining. And yes, it was a wonderful, wonderful day. We had Grandmaster Efimenko, who played Simo, this discussion, and now I just would love to invite you to some snacks in the aftermath, some get together, and yeah, to enjoy the rest of the evening with us.
You guys on the stream will have to feed yourselves, though. Yeah.
I think actually no one has thanked you for organizing this. While we are easy to get, we like to talk about this. This is the first time something like this has been organized, so I think the one who really deserves praise is you for putting up the.
So, thank you.